Dr. Rowena Garcia is a postdoctoral researcher at the Developmental Psycholinguistics Group of the University of Potsdam. Her research focuses on children's acquisition of morphosyntax and phonology. She uses corpus, data analysis, and psycholinguistic methods to investigate how children process linguistic input online and how they acquire their ambient language. Most of her work has been on the L1 acquisition of Tagalog, an Austronesian language from the Philippines. Before her current position in Potsdam, she was a postdoctoral researcher at the Max Planck Institute for Psycholinguistics Language Development Department. She is also a visiting professor at the University of the Philippines, Manila's College of Allied Medical Professions. She earned her PhD at the University of Potsdam with her dissertation titled Thematic Role Assignment and Word Order Preferences in the Child Language Acquisition of Tagalog. She earned this within a consortium of 5 universities in the IDEA Lab program. IDEA Lab stands for International Doctorate for Experimental Approaches to Language and Brain. Before becoming a researcher, she worked as a speech pathologist in Manila. Welcome, Rowena.
Hi.
Hi, very great to have you here. And I'd actually like to start with that first thing that I just mentioned, that you're in your previous work that you were a speech pathologist in Manila. And by having that position, obviously you were interested in language. But I'm curious what made you decide to come to Germany, come to Potsdam, to become a child language researcher.
Yeah, thank you so much for this question. And again, thank you so much for this invitation. So I didn't really plan on doing a PhD. At that time, I applied for a scholarship for a master's in clinical linguistics in Europe, so mostly based in Germany because of personal and professional reasons. So personally, I really crave cognitive stimulation at that time, and I really miss being a student at the university. And professionally, my patients were really my motivation for pursuing further studies. So as fulfilling as it was to see their progress, I found it quite frustrating sometimes when I could not help them further. And I truly believe that it's mainly through undergoing further studies and doing research that I could be of better help to them. And I also thought that it's through research that I could reach out to more children. So at the time, I thought after my master's, I'd go back home and continue being a speech pathologist in clinics, but also teach at the university. But I had a professor in the Netherlands back then who kept convincing me, well, who convinced me to do a PhD instead. And I'm very glad that she did. And that's how I ended up in research.
Okay, I'm really glad that she did too. So it's great to have you now, post PhD in the field. And that's, I think, really interesting reasons to make the switch over from a more applied position to more research-based position. So, but I'm curious then, you have all of this experience that you gathered as a speech pathologist. So how does that prior work inform your research, right? You kind of have a different background than somebody like me
Yeah.
who's never done something like that.
Yeah, so at least in terms of topics, for example, I'm still most interested in investigating basic linguistic phenomena. So those where my former patients had issues. So for example, my early work on Tagalog word order preference, that was really motivated by my speech pathology practice. So since most of our resources in the Philippines are from the West and there are no norms uh, on Tagalog speaking children's language development, we actually really had difficulties creating therapy goals for children who were Tagalog dominant. It's a pity, but at that time, honestly, it was easier for us if our patient was dominant in English, and at least we knew what is the next structure to target. And yeah, for Tagalog, I remember discussing with co-therapists what sentence structure we should teach. Should it be SVO like English, which is also possible in Tagalog, but is actually apparently a formal way of speaking and really more common in written language? And yeah, I'm glad that my research collaborators and I have an answer to this now of what structure to teach. And in terms of method, my experience as a speech pathologist gives me a good idea of what would work with children or how to adjust our methods to a non-lab setting, which is our typical data collection situation in the Philippines.
Okay, very interesting. Yeah, very cool. And I'm also glad that you were able to answer that question that you had as
Yeah.
a speech pathologist. So turning a little bit more to what you're currently working on, one of your current research projects is examining the role of acoustic salience on phonetic discrimination. So specifically, you're investigating this claim, right, that infants can discriminate all sound contrasts early on, and that only through exposure to ambient language does their discrimination become more language specific. So this is perceptual reorganization, and it's been considered a dominant idea in our field for decades, I'd say. So tell us a little bit about this study and what you think you'll find.
Yeah, thank you for asking about this. So yeah, I was recently in the Philippines for this project. So we look at Tagalog-learning infants' discrimination of subtle nasal contrasts n and ng. I hope that's heard, that's audible. I'm not sure.
Is one
But
a
yeah,
little bit more velar-ish?
yeah, so it's dental and velar,
Okay.
n and ng.
Okay.
So in Tagalog, this is a native contrast in the beginning of syllables. So
Mm.
there was this study by Narayan et al. In 2010 that babies in Canada who were also exposed to Tagalog and other Philippine languages with this contrast could not discriminate these two sounds at the age of 6 to 8 months,
Mm.
when we should actually expect universal discrimination. So
Mm.
they only showed discrimination at 10 to 12 months. However, there was also this other study by Sundara et al. In 2018 using an infant-controlled paradigm. So it differed a bit in the method.
Mm.
And what they found is that even 4-month-old English learning children can discriminate the contrast. So that's really going against each other somehow.
Mm.
So we thought of using Sundara et al.'s method and testing it on Tagalog learning babies in the Philippines. So
Mm.
given that studies in Asia by Mazuka and colleagues very recently have shown later discrimination of native contrasts, we thought that we should test babies in the country, so in the Philippines. And so far, our preliminary analyses show that the 4 to 6 month old Tagalog learning babies do not discriminate the contrast, but only the older 10 to 12-month-olds do so. We still have a lot of work to do to really, so at the moment, these are really preliminary, and we're really interested in finding out the reason for the differences in these results. But what I would like to say is that Chandan Narayan and Mega Sundara were super supportive in our endeavor. They shared with us their stimuli, helped us a lot in preparing for the study, answered all of our questions. And as a junior researcher, that was really inspiring for me. And I think this is the right way to do our science.
Oh, that's such a nice thing to hear. Oh, yeah. And this is really important work too. Like this is the kind of hole that we want to fill in terms of our knowledge. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're collecting that data in the Philippines. You're also collecting a longitudinal corpus of Tagalog child-directed and children's speech, so child-directed speech and children's speech, together with some other collaborators with the aim, thank you very much, of making a childless contribution in the future. So I'm curious, and maybe, speaking about the previous study a little bit, but I'm also curious about just the general challenges you faced in collecting data for this corpus, especially considering it's longitudinal.
Yeah. So this is a project with collaborators at the University of the Philippines, Manila, and at Brown University. So
Mm.
this project is actually focused on how children acquire negation words. So we wanted to examine children's production of these words and also the input that they receive. That's why a longitudinal corpus is really important for us. And the main issue so far is really dropout. Since we record them every 2 weeks, it requires commitment from the families. So we started with 5 participants, and one already dropped out after around 6 months. And that's when we decided to recruit 5 more just to be ready for more dropouts. And we really try our best to keep the participants motivated. So periodically, I visit the family. So far it's been every 4 to 6 months, I visit the families and provide them with updates on their child's language development, as well as tips on how to further stimulate language development. So this is coming from my speech pathology background that I could do this. And for example, when the children are sick, we also help them to get checked by a pediatrician. We also regularly ask them what changes they would like, for example, in terms of the materials that we bring to them. So because we have toys and books that we provide in case they want to use them during the recordings, and also the time when we conduct these. So we're very flexible with that. We really try to adjust to what they would like. There's also this instance lately, it seems that one of our children's language development is quite slow. So we
Mm.
really had to think about this. And thanks to our Brown collaborators, we could promise the child's family that we can financially support the child's checkup with a developmental pediatrician, which is
Wow.
quite expensive. So this is
Yeah.
really to check if there's any diagnosis. At the moment, they're waiting for their schedule. And we also thought that maybe in case the child will be diagnosed with a developmental disorder, it will still be valuable to have their longitudinal data, even if
Absolutely.
that was not our original plan.
Mm.
Um, and other things, yeah, it's a bit tricky because I'm not based in the Philippines. So this data collection is really made possible by our local assistants who are committed to the project and who obviously also care about the children's language development. So yeah, that really matters a lot that they are really concerned. They would really write to me when they notice, for example, okay, is this typical? Is this slow? So I really appreciate that. And yeah, overall, it's a much bigger project than we all thought it would be. But we are really hoping that it will be beneficial for many other future studies, not just for negation. That's
Mm.
why we're investing a lot of resources on it now.
Yeah, I'm sure that that is going to be a very valuable resource. And I'm also really happy to hear, you're over, this longitudinal period, collecting this data, you're building a relationship with these families. And the interesting things to hear how you're then able to give back to them as well. And also a wonderful contribution from Brown to be able to help out the family with diagnoses. And I agree. I think that that'll be a very interesting contribution. Yeah.
Thank you.
So when we communicated before this interview, you told me that you are grateful to conduct research in your home country, the Philippines, and in your native language, Tagalog. So I think I can imagine why this is the case. But really, I'd love to hear why in your own words.
Yeah, I think this question makes me rather emotional.
Oh,
Um, so yeah, my high school and my university in the Philippines really taught us that we have to serve our nation. So the importance of giving back to our fellow Filipinos was really emphasized in our education. I think my classmates and I grew up aiming to contribute to improving our fellow Filipinos' lives in one way or another. As much as that sounds very idealistic, maybe even naive, but I looked for my submitted application to this scholarship for the master's, and there I wrote, should I be fortunate enough to join your institution, I could gain knowledge and practice that I could share with my fellow Filipinos when I come back here to focus on teaching in the collegiate level and doing research. Through this scholarship, I firmly believe that I could be of service to the Filipino people. And I really meant that. And these days, sometimes I do feel guilty for being abroad. But most of the time, I recognize that I can do these studies on Tagalog and on Filipino children because of the resources that I am fortunate to receive here in Europe. So yeah, if I had been back home, I don't think I would be able to do this research.
yeah. Oh, it sounds to me like you've reached that goal, right? You are giving back or if you haven't met it yet, I'm pretty sure that you will. Okay, so I myself first became aware of you and your work when you published the paper, How Diverse is Child Language Acquisition Research in First Language? And this was with Evan Kidd in 2022. So this study examined papers published in prominent child language journals in the last 45 years. By the way, that's almost as old as iASCL itself, which is going to be turning 50 this year. So I think that that's a really
Wow.
good, time period. So it was asked, so you're asking where research about child language is being produced. So that means where the authors are affiliated, as well as the language background of the children being studied. And this provided the field, I would have to say, based on the reactions, with a sobering qualification of the state of diversity in child language acquisition research. So could you summarize the results for us?
Yeah, so this study provided evidence for what I think many of us had already suspected, that most of our knowledge on language acquisition comes from only English and a few other Indo-European languages. So what we found is that, to be precise, it comes from only 1.5% of the world's languages.
Huh.
And the good thing, though, is that we see that the number of published studies on non-Indo-European languages and other Indo-European languages, it's increasing more rapidly than the number of articles on English. Although we also see that these are still due to only a few languages, so it's still not equal overall.
Mhm.
But we also thought that this lack of diversity might be due to where the resources are. That's why we also looked at the locus of research production, or the affiliation of the researchers who publish these studies.
Mm.
And it's quite similar to the language coverage results. So the majority of the researchers are based in North America and in Europe. And actually, only 1% of the articles had authors from Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, and South and Southeast Asia combined. So it was really quite depressing in a way. And yeah, if our acquisition theories are based on only a few languages, we miss out on the typological diversity out there, which limits our ability to adequately map and explain the limits of our human capacity to acquire language. And given the fast rate that at which languages are disappearing,
Mm.
we feel that there's some urgency to broaden language coverage while we still can. And it makes it imperative for us to try at least to increase the diversity of our science and of our researchers.
So very interesting. And I really think that, like you said, so the results of that study kind of were expected, right? I don't think that it was really a surprise, but maybe the surprise is are the actual concrete numbers.
Yeah.
And these I find are often kind of the best studies, right? Where you study something that everybody already has an intuition about. But the whole point is actually getting to do it. So I'm curious where the idea for doing this study came from.
Yeah, this was really Evan Kidd's idea, and he had already started working on it even before I joined. So Evan had generously invited me to be a part of this important paper. And I just want to share this, that researchers I met in conferences or events would tell me that they have read our work, or that they have this paper in their curriculum, and I had never experienced this before this paper. And yeah, it also gave me several opportunities like talks in different labs abroad. And yeah, Evan and I think that one of the solutions in increasing the diversity of our researchers is to provide support to researchers or students from underrepresented groups, where I consider myself to be part in. And the support I have gotten from researchers like Evan and my current boss, Natalie Bol Abitisian, is one of the main reasons I can still work on an understudied language like Tagalog.
And at a very basic level, it gives everybody something to cite in their grant application so that they can say, we need to do this, underrepresented, need more diversity.
Exactly.
Please give us money to do so.
Yes, please.
So thank you for giving us that. So in your previous answer, I kind of got an impression, I think, of what people were thinking about this publication, but I'm curious about the kind of feedback you've received about this publication, as well as your other work, and generally your work on diversity in child language acquisition research.
Yeah, first of all, it was really amazing that it became part of a special issue of First Language, and that so many researchers took time to engage with it and write their commentaries. It was really great to read about their different perspectives and, of course, the possible concrete solutions that they offered. Many of them we had not thought about ourselves. And yeah, again, for something this big, we really need as many people as possible. And for us, it meant that we're ready to tackle this issue and to really do something about it. And I'm very happy to hear from people, for example, that the article either made people more aware of the lack of diversity issue in language acquisition, or it gave them support to talk about their issues in conducting or publishing their studies on understudied populations or languages. Actually, even before this article was published, I would often get compliments for the fact that I work on an understudied language. So it kind of shows that researchers recognize the value of these studies at some level. I guess the problem is that this has not yet translated to, say, financial support for such projects. And it still seems to be the case that the studies are not cited well or not really given prestigious spots in conferences. So Leher Singh, for example, wrote in her commentary that there's this bias to view studies on well-represented groups as reflecting basic aspects of development, while those studies on underrepresented groups are used to show evidence for sociocultural variation.
Mm.
And yet this publication also connected me to researchers who care about this topic a lot. So for example, I have been invited by Leher to join a team that looks at publication bias against developmental studies whose samples are not from the US or whose authors are not from the US. And we conducted a survey to examine the barriers that researchers have faced in publishing these studies. We still have a lot of work to do, but we see, for example, that authors have been asked for standardized tests, even though these may not exist in the population that they're studying, or to stratify or broaden their sample to achieve greater diversity, let's say in terms of socioeconomic status or racial ethnic minority status, even if these are not relevant to the populations that they're looking at. And many have also reported that they have been asked to provide extensive justifications for why they are studying a particular phenomenon in a given population, to add extensive demographic data, to have their work proofread by a native speaker. They have
Mm.
also been asked to explain its generalizability, which on its own sounds okay. I think we should really do this for all of our studies. But the problem is, from the free-form responses, we see that some authors feel that works on US populations do not get asked for these study or manuscript changes. So that is quite alarming.
Yeah, definitely. This is a burden that hopefully unconsciously, but in some cases perhaps consciously, get placed on members of our field that, don't come from the US or, places where well-represented languages are spoken. So this is also a really key thing to be able to quantify, right? This is, I really hate to say it, but not really much of a surprise, these findings. But to be able to say to everybody, yes, we can actually provide scientific evidence for this, I think we are scientists, right?
Yeah.
This is maybe one piece to finally get, make sure that people are aware of it. They can't ignore it anymore,
Exactly.
and be a driver for change. Yeah. So related to that, right? Diversity in research is not just about the little participants that we study, right? Cute as they are, but also about who is doing the studying, namely the researchers. And so your study, your 2022 paper with Evan Kidd, found that even if the diversity of languages being studied is increasing, this research is overwhelmingly produced by researchers located in the global north. So I think you started to answer this in the previous question, but what kind of consequences do you think this has on our field?
Yeah. So we think, for example, really that the key to designing studies that are culturally appropriate and respectful to the traditions of the community that is being studied, and to identifying research questions that really matter to the society or to that community and to their concerns regarding child language, is having a local on board. So if there are no researchers in the global south, this becomes an issue. So aside from the fact that they're the most knowledgeable about the situation since they're from this area, it's actually usually the locals who will care most about studying these languages or these populations anyway, since to them it's not only about the scientific value, but also the societal or cultural value. And second, locals are the ones who have access to the community. But the lack of resources in the global south make it difficult or impossible for locals to conduct research or even to study our field because it's probably not offered in their universities.
Mm.
And we think that one solution would be to really create horizontal partnerships between institutions in the global north and those in the global south. And another solution that we have actively tried is to provide more opportunities to connect researchers from both regions and to provide free access to online lectures and discussions regarding child language acquisition to those who usually cannot afford to attend such workshops or conferences. It's
Mhm.
usually very expensive. You have to travel, you have to get a visa. So all of these barriers. So we tried our best, and that was the aim of the truly global L Plus Summer Winter School on Language Acquisition, which we had in 2021 and last year in 2023. And yeah, it was really a big team effort. It was made possible by the dedication from so many researchers who cared about the same cause.
Yeah, that's also actually a hidden kind of hidden burden that I think that people from, the United States or Europe don't really encounter is the burden to get a visa to travel for conferences. And often by the time, so we're working extremely hard to have acceptances, right, that they came out for the ISCL Congress this year as soon as we could possibly do it.
Yes.
And also, not only that, but the travel bursaries that we're doing, that researchers who applied for help can actually know that they're getting that help in time to actually attend the Congress, right?
Exactly.
Or to apply for a visa in time to actually attend the Congress. And I think that this is something that a lot of organizers, well, haven't thought about in the past. And so I'm guessing L plus will be again in 2025 based on this every other year pattern. So hoping that it continues to be a success. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit. So I'm about to teach a new seminar on first language acquisition this semester. And I was curious, maybe I'll play this to my students this semester. I was curious what you think the most important message that students enrolled in a language acquisition course today, what message is most important for them to get?
Yeah, I think that in order to fully understand language acquisition, we need to broaden our sample and also look at underrepresented languages and populations. And that even if it's not possible for the students to conduct such research, simply consuming research on understudied groups or using diversity as a guiding theoretical construct in what they do is already a great contribution. So I really hope that the students will get this message.
I hope so too. And maybe that means that I need to pepper that in throughout my semester. So take that upon myself also as the researcher, right?
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so I'd say that we're at the end of the interview. I'd like to thank you so much for joining me today. Um, and I wish you all the best. And hopefully we'll be seeing you soon. Potsdam and Braunschweig are not very far away from each other. And maybe we'll see you at IASCL this summer.
Thank you so much.
You're
See
welcome.
you then.